Welcome to Hired in IT. Our mission is simple: help you build the skills that employers actually want. Whether you're trying to land your first IT job, switch careers, earn a promotion, or increase your salary, we're here to help. Every video is thoroughly researched and designed to make complex IT topics easy to understand. If there's an IT topic you'd like us to cover, leave a comment below. We may turn your suggestion into our next video. Turning IT knowledge into career opportunities. The moment a home lab or cloud server becomes reachable from the public internet, it may begin receiving automated connection attempts, scans, and login probes. That does not automatically mean someone has broken in. It means your service is visible and automated systems are discovering what is exposed. That is an important security lesson. Public exposure changes the job from "does my lab work" to "what can reach it, who should be able to reach it, and how will I know if something unusual happens?" This video is about recognizing common network attack patterns and understanding the defensive controls that reduce their impact. You will see denial of service attempts, man-in-the-middle and spoofing scenarios, password attacks, malware, social engineering, and reconnaissance. Treat unsolicited probing as a reason to review exposure, logging, patching, and access controls, not as proof that a compromise has already occurred. By the end of this video, you'll be able to do 3 things. First, you'll be able to classify common network security events into a useful starting set of categories: denial of service, man-in-the-middle and spoofing, password-based attacks, malware, reconnaissance, and social engineering. These categories are a learning framework, not a complete or universally exclusive classification system. Real attacks can overlap categories, and one incident may involve several techniques. Second, you'll learn to map each scenario to defensive controls that address the actual failure mode. That might mean rate limiting and upstream DDoS protection for abusive traffic, correctly validated TLS and secure network configuration for interception risks, stronger authentication and sign-in monitoring for password attacks, EDR and segmentation for malware, or verification procedures and awareness training for social engineering. Third, you'll learn to read evidence from real defensive tools. We'll look at what an Nmap scan can tell you about exposed services and what Microsoft Entra ID sign-in logs can tell you about suspicious authentication patterns. Later, we'll connect these concepts into an attack path model. The important point is that attackers don't respect our category labels. Reconnaissance may lead to initial access. Initial access may lead to credential abuse or malware. That access may enable lateral movement. And eventually the activity may create business impact. Think of these categories as a useful way to organize what you're seeing, not as rigid boxes every attack must fit inside. A network attack is an attempt to gain unauthorized access, disrupt services, alter information, or otherwise cause harm through networked systems. To understand an attack, separate 4 ideas. A threat is a potential source of harm. It may be an attacker, a malicious campaign, a technical failure, or another adverse event. A vulnerability is a weakness or condition that can contribute to harm. An unpatched service, weak router password, exposed management interface, or overly broad firewall rule can all be vulnerabilities. An attack is an action intended to exploit a weakness or cause harm. And reconnaissance is information gathering. Port scans, service discovery, public record research, and banners collection may be used before an attack, But reconnaissance alone does not prove that exploitation occurred. A realistic chain might look like this. Reconnaissance identifies an exposed remote access service. Weak credentials or a known vulnerability create an opportunity. An attacker attempts access. Then, the defender investigates and responds. The professional skill is not labeling every scan as a breach. It is understanding what the evidence shows, what risk it creates, and which control should be reviewed next. Picture a clinic on Monday morning. The appointment portal slows to a crawl and patients can't check in. Nobody's stealing records, yet. One attacker is running a free tool from a single laptop, generating thousands of requests. That's a denial of service attack, an availability attack, not data theft. The goal is to make a service unusable. A denial of service attack, or DOS, attempts to make a service unavailable to legitimate users. A distributed denial of service attack, or DDoS, does the same thing using traffic from many systems or sources. That difference matters. If one source is overwhelming a small service, a local firewall rule or rate limit may help as part of the response. If thousands of distributed sources are consuming your internet connection or application capacity, blocking a single IP address is rarely enough. The organization may need help from its internet provider, cloud platform, content delivery network, or specialized DDoS protection service that can filter traffic upstream. Botnets are one way DDoS attacks can be distributed. A botnet is a group of compromised devices controlled by an attacker. But do not confuse all automated bot traffic with DDoS traffic. Bots can be beneficial, malicious, or simply unrelated to a DDoS event. The key question is whether traffic is exhausting bandwidth, protocol capacity, application resources, or another dependency that legitimate users need. One reason defenders take automated traffic seriously is that it is common on the public web. Akamai reported in 2024 that bots accounted for 42% of overall web traffic in the dataset covered by its report, and that many of those bots were malicious. That statistic is about bot traffic, not a measure of botnets, not a DDoS rate, and not proof that every bot is an attacker. For DDoS, think in three broad categories. Volumetric attacks try to consume available bandwidth. Protocol attacks try to exhaust or misuse network and transport resources. Application layer attacks target the resources of a specific website, API, or service. A TCP SYN flood is one protocol-level example. It sends many TCP connection requests without completing the three-way handshake, which can consume connection state resources and prevent legitimate connections. The defensive lesson is not block everything. It is to monitor abnormal traffic, understand which resource is under pressure, and use layered protection appropriate to the attack type. Quick checkpoint. A server's connection table begins filling with half-open sessions. The server is receiving a large number of TCP SYN packets, but those connection attempts never complete the TCP three-way handshake. Legitimate users are beginning to have trouble establishing new connections. What attack pattern does this describe? Pause for a second and make your choice. The answer is a TCP SYN flood. A SYN flood sends large numbers of connection requests without completing the handshake, potentially consuming the resources the server uses to track pending connections. Remember the evidence. Lots of SYN requests, lots of half-open connections, handshakes that aren't being completed. That's the pattern you should associate with a SYN flood. But don't diagnose an attack from one packet alone. Look at volume, timing, connection state, source distribution, service health, and whether legitimate traffic is being affected. Rate limiting can be one defensive control against some abusive connection patterns, but it is not a universal DDoS solution. In a controlled lab, a firewall can be configured to limit new connection attempts so that an unusual burst does not consume all available resources. Before applying any limit, establish a baseline. How many legitimate new connections does the service normally receive? What happens during a peak period? Which applications, monitoring systems, and health checks need to connect? Then test any rule in a non-production environment or through an approved change process. A limit that is too low can block legitimate users just as effectively as an attack can. For a larger distributed attack, local rules may be only one small part of the response. Upstream filtering, load balancing, content delivery, application protection, incident response, and coordination with the provider may all be necessary. Only change firewall rules on systems you own or are explicitly authorized to administer. The principle is simple. Learn what normal traffic looks like, detect abnormal bursts, and apply controls that reduce abuse without breaking legitimate service. Some classic denial of service examples still appear in security training because they explain important design lessons. Ping of Death and Teardrop involved malformed or oversized packets that affected vulnerable legacy implementations. Modern, patched systems are generally designed to handle those historical flaws, so treat these as legacy vulnerability patterns, not as the attacks most beginners are likely to encounter today. Smurf attacks used spoofed source ICMP requests and broadcast behavior to amplify traffic. Disabling directed broadcasts and applying anti-spoofing controls remain relevant defenses. Today, defenders more commonly prepare for volumetric floods, protocol resource exhaustion, and application layer HTTP floods that target expensive pages, APIs, searches, or login workflows. The controls depend on the attack type. Patch and maintain network devices and operating systems. Use provider, CDN, or DDoS protection services for large public-facing exposure. Apply service-aware rate limits and web application protections for HTTP traffic. And monitor traffic so the team can distinguish an attack from a capacity problem, maintenance event, or application failure. You are in a hotel lobby connected to guest Wi-Fi, and your browser shows a padlock next to a website address. That padlock is meaningful, but it does not mean every risk has disappeared. When the browser successfully validates HTTPS and the site's certificate, TLS helps protect the confidentiality and integrity of traffic between your browser and the legitimate site you connected to. That protection defeats many simple network interception attempts. A network attacker cannot normally sit in the middle, read your traffic, and still present a valid connection without a trusted certificate, a compromised device, a certificate warning bypass, or some other breakdown of trust. The real risks on untrusted networks include connecting to a rogue access point, ignoring certificate warnings, entering credentials into a lookalike website, using a compromised endpoint, or exposing services that should not be public. The lesson is not the padlock lies. The lesson is, understand what the padlock protects, verify the destination you are connecting to, and treat warnings or unexpected login prompts as signals to stop and investigate. A man-in-the-middle attack occurs when an attacker positions themselves between two parties and attempts to observe, relay, alter, or influence their communication. For the attack to matter, the attacker must gain a useful position in the communication path and defeat, or take advantage of a failure in, the protections the two endpoints rely on. On an untrusted local network, an attacker might attempt to redirect traffic using ARP spoofing, a rogue access point, or malicious network configuration. But correctly validated TLS significantly limits what a network position attacker can read or change. That is why defenders use several layers together. Secure Wi-Fi and network configuration reduce the chance of malicious positioning. TLS protects data in transit. Certificate validation helps the browser identify the service it intended to reach. VPNs can provide additional protection on untrusted networks, although they do not make a compromised device safe. And users should never click through certificate warnings simply to make a page load. The goal is to make it difficult for an attacker to become a trusted part of a connection they do not own. Spoofing is about presenting false identity or routing information so a system makes the wrong trust decision. ARP spoofing sends deceptive address resolution protocol messages on a local network to associate an IP address with the attacker's MAC address. It can redirect local traffic when devices accept the false mapping. DNS spoofing attempts to provide a false answer for a domain name, sometimes by manipulating a resolver response or cache. Defenses include secure resolver configuration, DNS-SEC, where appropriate monitoring and ensuring applications validate TLS certificates. IP spoofing forges the source address of packets. It is commonly used in some reflection or amplification attacks and can complicate source-based filtering. Anti-spoofing controls at network boundaries help reduce it. And a fake website may use a familiar name, a deceptive look-alike domain, or even a valid certificate for the attacker's own domain. A valid padlock means the connection to that displayed domain is encrypted. It does not guarantee that the domain itself is the organization you intended to reach. The professional habit is to ask, what identity claim is being made, what system is trusting it, and what evidence verifies that trust? Quick checkpoint. I'm going to give you two scenarios. Scenario 1. A device on the local network sends deceptive ARP messages so that another system associates a legitimate IP address with the attacker's MAC address. What is that? ARP spoofing. The attacker is manipulating the local IP to MAC mapping in an attempt to redirect traffic. Now, scenario 2. A user requests the address for a legitimate website, but the DNS information they receive points them toward the wrong destination. What is that? DNS spoofing. The attacker is manipulating or supplying false name resolution information so the victim makes the wrong routing or trust decision. Here's the distinction to remember. ARP spoofing manipulates local network address mapping. DNS spoofing manipulates name resolution. Both rely on false information causing another system to trust the wrong destination. Session hijacking and replay attacks both involve valid authentication material, but they are not the same thing. Session hijacking occurs when an attacker obtains a live session cookie, access token, or other session credential and uses it to act as an already authenticated user. Controls can include secure session handling, short session lifetimes where appropriate device and sign-in risk checks, re-authentication for sensitive actions, protection against token theft, and rapid response when a session is suspected to be compromised. A replay attack occurs when an attacker captures a valid message or transaction and resends it later in an attempt to repeat an action. Protocols and applications can reduce replay risk with nonces, timestamps, sequence numbers, transaction identifiers, challenge response mechanisms, and expiration checks. TLS helps protect traffic in transit, but it does not solve every session or application design problem by itself. The control must match the way the session or transaction is actually being abused. Use TLS for web, API, and remote management services, and treat certificate warnings as a reason to stop and investigate. On untrusted networks, a VPN can add a protected path to an organization's network or trusted service. But remember, a VPN does not protect you if the endpoint itself is compromised, if you enter credentials into a lookalike site, or if you ignore a valid security warning. For remote administration, do not expose Remote Desktop Protocol, or RDP, directly to the public internet unless there is a documented business need and strong compensating protections. RDP is a Windows protocol that lets authorized users control a desktop remotely. Public exposure can attract scanning, credential attacks, and exploitation attempts. Safer designs often place remote administration behind a VPN, Zero Trust Access Gateway, Bastion host, or other approved access path. Require MFA, apply least privilege. Patch systems promptly based on risk and vendor guidance, monitor sign-in activity, and restrict which users and networks can connect. The goal is not to make remote work impossible. It is to make remote administration deliberate, authenticated, monitored, and difficult to abuse. It's 3 a.m., and a script is quietly trying one common password, Spring 2025, against 200 accounts. Each account sees exactly one failed login, so the lockout threshold never trips. No alarm. No single user looks suspicious. That's password spraying. One or two common passwords across many accounts, staying just under the radar. It's not brute force, it's patience, scaled out. Brute force and password spraying both involve repeated authentication attempts, but their patterns are different. A brute force attack focuses many password guesses against one account. Imagine one username, then password 1, password 2, password 3, and so on. Password spraying flips that pattern. Instead of trying many passwords against one account, the attacker tries one or a small number of common passwords across many accounts. For example, try the same common password against user 1, then user 2, user 3, and continue across the organization. Why does that distinction matter? A high volume of failed attempts against one account is often more likely to trigger per-account lockout, throttling, adaptive protections, or detection controls. Password spraying attempts to distribute failures across many accounts, potentially avoiding simple controls that only look for repeated failures against one username. But don't assume spraying is invisible. Modern identity systems can correlate activity across accounts, source networks, devices, locations, and time windows. And don't assume every system uses the same lockout behavior. Some environments use account lockout. Others use rate limiting, smart lockout, MFA, risk-based controls, IP restrictions, or combinations of these protections. The analyst's skill is recognizing the pattern. Many passwords against one account? Think brute force. One or a few passwords across many accounts? Think password spraying. Then investigate the surrounding evidence before deciding what actually happened. In Microsoft Entra ID, start by reviewing sign-in logs for failed authentication events. Look for patterns that may suggest password spraying, a similar failure type occurring across many accounts, within a related time window from the same source IP, network, autonomous system, device pattern, or user agent. Do not treat one field as proof. Invalid credential failures can also come from outdated applications, stale-saved passwords, misconfigured services, or ordinary user mistakes. A stronger investigation correlates several signals. Are many accounts affected? Is the timing unusual? Is the same source targeting unrelated users? Are there risky sign-ins, unfamiliar devices, unexpected locations, or successful sign-ins after the failures? Do password protection, identity protection, or detection tools raise related alerts? Use the error code information shown in your tenant, but confirm it against the current platform documentation and the surrounding event context. The analyst's skill is not memorizing one error code. It is separating a suspicious pattern from a conclusion and gathering enough evidence to decide what response is appropriate. Quick recall. An identity security alert shows something unusual. 500 different accounts each received one failed login attempt. The attempts occurred within a related time window, and the same common password appears to have been tried across those accounts. Is this brute force or password spraying? Pause and make your choice. The answer is password spraying. Remember the pattern. Brute force concentrates many password guesses against one account. Password spraying distributes one or a small number of password guesses across many accounts. And in a real investigation, don't stop at the label. Ask whether the attempts share a source IP, network, user agent, device pattern, timing pattern, or other infrastructure. Then look for the most important escalation signal. Did any of those attempts eventually succeed? That's where a suspicious pattern can become a much more urgent investigation. MFA fatigue happens when an attacker already has a password and repeatedly sends push requests, hoping the user approves one just to make the prompt stop. The attacker is trying to turn a strong technical control into a human decision made under pressure. Number matching helps because the user must enter a number shown on the sign-in screen rather than approving a blind prompt. Phishing-resistant methods, such as FIDO2 security keys, can provide stronger protection against many credential phishing attacks because they bind authentication to the legitimate service. Organizations can also use sign-in risk policies, device requirements, access restrictions, rate limits, alerting, and incident response procedures to reduce repeated prompt abuse. Now the important limitation. MFA protects the authentication event. If an attacker steals an already valid session token through malware, a compromised browser, a malicious proxy, or another endpoint compromise, the attacker may be able to act within that session until additional controls detect or stop it. That does not mean MFA is useless. It means no single control covers every attack path. Watch for unusual sign-in patterns, unexpected token use, impossible travel signals, unfamiliar devices, or actions that do not fit the user's normal activity. When suspicious activity is confirmed, revoke sessions, reset credentials as appropriate, investigate the endpoint, and follow the organization's incident process. Malware is not one thing. 3 network-relevant categories are worms, trojans, and ransomware. A worm can self-propagate across systems when it finds a vulnerable service, weak configuration, exposed credential, or other path that allows it to move without relying on the next user to click. A Trojan disguises itself as something the user trusts, such as a fake invoice, malicious installer, or unauthorized utility. Once executed, it may install a backdoor, steal data, or enable further access. Ransomware encrypts or disrupts systems and data to pressure an organization into payment or another response. Some ransomware campaigns use self-propagating techniques. Others rely on stolen credentials, remote management tools, manual lateral movement, or malware deployed by an attacker. Do not assume every ransomware incident spreads like a worm. For defense, patch internet-facing and internal services according to risk. Reduce unnecessary exposure. Segment networks and enforce inter-network access controls. Use endpoint detection and response. Application allow listing where appropriate, least privilege, monitored administration, and tested backups with recovery plans. The goal is to prevent one compromised device or account from becoming access to every system in the organization. Ransomware does not always stay on the first machine it reaches. A campaign may begin with phishing, stolen credentials, an exposed remote access service, a vulnerable application, or another initial access path. After access, the attacker may look for credentials, remote management opportunities, file shares, weak permissions, poorly protected backups, or systems that trust the compromised account. Lateral movement may occur through legitimate administrative tools, stolen credentials, vulnerable services, misconfigured shares, or malware capabilities. It is not limited to one protocol. This is why segmentation matters. But separate VLAN labels are not enough by themselves. VLANs create logical Layer 2 boundaries. To control traffic between those boundaries, organizations also need inter-VLAN routing rules, access control lists, firewall policies, identity-aware controls, and least privilege service permissions. A finance workstation should not be able to reach an HR server, backup system, domain controller, or administrative service unless there is a documented business reason and a controlled path. The path on screen is a model, not a guaranteed sequence. Initial access execution, credential access or discovery, lateral movement, and impact such as encryption or data theft. The defensive objective is to make each step harder, more visible, and easier to contain. Attackers do not always need malware if a network device has weak credentials, outdated software, or an exposed management interface. Start with firmware and software management. Apply vendor security advisories, prioritize known exploited vulnerabilities and internet-facing devices, follow approved maintenance windows, and maintain an emergency process for critical issues. A universal quarterly schedule may be appropriate in some environments, but risk and vendor guidance should drive the actual cadence. Next, secure management access. Disable insecure legacy protocols such as Telnet and SSH version 1. Use encrypted management protocols, strong authentication, MFA where supported, dedicated management networks, VPN or bastion access, logging, and restrictions on which users and sources can administer the device. Then review access control rules. Broad any-to-any rules may be necessary temporarily during troubleshooting, but they should not become permanent defaults. Every allowed path should have a business purpose, an owner, and periodic review. A careful configuration audit will not prevent every attack, but it can remove avoidable exposure before someone else discovers it. Not every security incident begins outside the firewall. An attacker may use a weak password, stolen credentials, a compromised account, or an account that should have been removed when someone changed roles or left the organization. That can lead to unauthorized access, misuse of legitimate privileges, or an insider threat scenario. The controls are straightforward but important. Apply least privilege so accounts receive only the access needed for current responsibilities. Use identity lifecycle processes to disable accounts, revoke active sessions, remove role and group access, and transfer resource ownership when someone leaves or changes roles. The timing should follow the organization's approved offboarding policy and the risk of the role. Require MFA where supported, especially for remote access, administrative actions, and sensitive systems. Monitor anomalous sign-ins and privileged activity. And remember, Zero Trust is not assume every user is malicious. It is a discipline of continuously evaluating identity, device, access context, and behavior rather than granting permanent trust based only on one successful login. I would also rename this from Malware versus Insider, because the actual lesson is about identity lifecycle and unauthorized access. Quick checkpoint before we move into reconnaissance. A former employee left the organization 6 months ago. Today, the security team discovers that the person's account can still access the billing system. What control failed? And what security risk does this create? Pause and think about it. The missing control is effective offboarding and access revocation. When someone leaves an organization, the identity lifecycle process should address the access they no longer need. Depending on the environment and approved process, that may include disabling the account, revoking active sessions, removing privileged roles, removing group memberships, removing application assignments, removing access to shared resources, and transferring ownership of resources or automation that the organization still needs. Because that process failed, a person who is no longer authorized may still have access to company information or systems. That creates unauthorized access risk and potentially insider misuse risk. But be careful with the label. The existence of an old active account does not prove that the former employee actually abused it. First, establish what access remained. Then determine whether the account was used. Then investigate the activity. That's the professional distinction. Access creates risk. Evidence establishes what actually happened. Before many attacks, someone gathers information about the environment. That activity is reconnaissance. It may include public record research, domain discovery, port scanning, service identification, configuration review, or traffic observation. An open port can reveal that a service is reachable. Service fingerprinting may provide clues about the product or version. A defender may then compare that exposure with patch status, configuration, known vulnerabilities, and business need. But do not assume that an open port is automatically a path to compromise. A reachable RDP service, for example, may still be protected by MFA, network restrictions, strong identity controls, patching, monitoring, and a secure remote access design. Packet sniffing is different from scanning. Sniffing passively observes traffic visible at a capture point. Scanning actively sends probes to learn what responds. Defenders use the same categories of information gathering on systems and networks they own, or are explicitly authorized to assess. The goal is to find unintended exposure before an attacker can exploit it. Nmap is a network discovery tool that defenders can use to understand exposure on systems and networks they own or are explicitly authorized to assess. When you see an Nmap result in a log or a lab, focus on the defensive questions. Which host was contacted? Which ports were tested? Which services appeared reachable? And does that exposure match what the organization intended to publish? By default, Nmap commonly focuses on a list of frequently used TCP ports rather than simply scanning port numbers 1 through 1000 in numeric order. The exact scan behavior depends on the options used and the permissions available to the operator. A SYN-based scan generally requires appropriate operating system privileges. Without them, Nmap may use a different connection method. You do not need to memorize every flag as a beginner. Learn to recognize that a scan may be an exposure check, an approved vulnerability management activity, a red team exercise, or suspicious reconnaissance. Context, authorization, source, timing, and the target scope determine the right response. Never scan public targets, workplace networks, or systems you do not control without explicit authorization. You do not need an expensive security stack to begin learning network visibility, but you do need authorization and an understanding of what each tool can actually see. TCP dump captures packets visible on the specific interface and capture point you choose. It can help you examine traffic to or from a system you own, a lab segment, or a network where you have explicit permission to capture. It does not automatically show every packet on an entire switched network. Wireshark provides a graphical packet analysis interface. It can help you inspect headers, flows, and handshake behavior in an authorized capture. Encrypted traffic may still reveal metadata and connection behavior, but the application contents are not automatically readable. Nmap helps defenders discover services exposed on authorized systems and networks. NetFlow, SFlow, or similar flow telemetry summarizes traffic patterns by source, destination, port, protocol, volume, and time. That can be useful for spotting unusual traffic spikes or distributed activity, even when a full packet capture is impractical. For a safe first exercise, capture traffic only on a personal lab system or approved test network for a short, defined period. Document what you expected to see, what you actually observed, and whether anything needs further investigation. The point is not to collect more data. It is to collect the right evidence within the right scope for a defensible security question. An employee gets a text from the help desk. It's urgent. A migration is happening and they need to verify their password by clicking a link. The link looks real. The person texting knows the employee's manager name because they pulled it from LinkedIn. This isn't a network vulnerability. It's social engineering, manipulating a person into giving away what the technology won't. Phishing is the most common flavor, but it's all the same move. Use urgency, fear, or familiarity to get a human to open the door. The defense is less trusting by default. Verify requests through a second channel, check the sender, and slow down whenever anyone pressures you to act fast. A firewall can't stop an employee from typing a password into a fake page. A help desk text is not the only way an attacker gathers useful information. Some attacks rely on physical access and social engineering rather than a technical network vulnerability. Dumpster diving is the search for discarded documents, labels, equipment, or notes that reveal credentials, internal names, contact details, inventory information, or network configuration. Shoulder surfing means observing someone's screen, PIN, badge use, or sensitive conversation. USB baiting tries to persuade someone to connect an unknown removable device, which can introduce malware or trigger unsafe behavior. The defense is practical. Use secure disposal and shredding for sensitive documents. Review decommissioned hardware before disposal and remove or sanitize configuration data. Use clean desk and screen lock practices. Train employees to report suspicious messages and unknown devices rather than interacting with them. And include physical security in risk reviews. These are not purely network attacks. They are examples of how attackers can gather the information or access needed to enable later technical attacks. Now let's connect everything we've learned. Real attacks don't follow one guaranteed sequence. Think of an attack path as a set of opportunities an attacker may attempt to connect. Reconnaissance might identify an exposed service, application, account, or other useful information. But reconnaissance does not automatically mean compromise. If the attacker finds a usable opportunity, the next objective may be initial access. That could come from phishing, stolen credentials, an exposed remote access service, a vulnerable application, social engineering, or another weakness. After gaining access, the attacker may attempt discovery. What systems can this account reach? What privileges does it have? Are there file shares, administrative tools, additional credentials, poorly protected backups, trusted relationships? Depending on the attacker's objective, that access might lead to credential theft, privilege escalation, lateral movement, data collection, persistence, malware deployment, or some combination of them. Eventually, the organization may experience impact. Data could be stolen. Systems could be encrypted. Services could become unavailable. Accounts could be abused. Information could be changed. Or the attacker could remain quietly inside the environment collecting information. And the path doesn't have to be perfectly linear. Attackers may repeat discovery after moving to another system. They may obtain additional credentials and move again. They may establish persistence before collecting data. They may fail at one path and try another. That's why the examples you've learned in this video should not be treated as isolated attack names. An Nmap scan might reveal exposure. A phishing message might contribute to initial access. Stolen credentials might enable access to another resource. Weak segmentation might make lateral movement easier. Poorly protected backups could increase the impact of ransomware. Each event creates a defensive question. What does the evidence actually show? What could the attacker reasonably do next? And which control can break or expose that path? That's how defenders should think about attack chains. Not as one fixed hallway every attacker follows, but as a changing set of paths that controls can block, restrict, detect, or contain. No single product stops every network attack. Effective defense is layered. For denial of service risk, use baseline monitoring, service-aware rate limits, resilient architecture, and upstream DDoS protection appropriate to the organization's exposure. For man-in-the-middle and spoofing risk, use correctly validated TLS, secure network configuration, safe resolver practices, anti-spoofing measures, and user training that treats certificate warnings and unexpected login prompts seriously. For password attacks, use phishing-resistant MFA where possible, password protection controls, sign-in risk detection, rate limits, least privilege, and a response process for suspicious activity. For malware and ransomware, use patching, secure configuration, endpoint detection, least privilege, application controls where appropriate, tested backups, and segmentation enforced through routing rules, ACLs, firewall policies, and identity-aware access controls. For network device exposure, use secure management paths, strong authentication, vendor advisory monitoring, configuration review, and removal of unnecessary services. If you want one safe lab exercise this week, choose a system you own. Document its intended exposed services, review a short period of its authorized logs or traffic, and compare the observed exposure to the intended design. Do not scan, capture, or change systems you do not own or lack written authorization to access. 3 takeaways. First, classify network security events by what they are trying to do: disrupt service, intercept or misdirect communication, abuse authentication, deploy or spread malware, gather information, or manipulate people. Second, map the event to a control that addresses the actual failure mode. A SYN flood may require rate limiting and upstream DDoS protection. DNS manipulation risk may require secure resolver practices, TLS validation, and monitoring. Password spraying may require correlated identity detection, stronger authentication, and identity response controls. Third, learn to read evidence in context. An Nmap result can reveal exposure. A sign-in log can reveal suspicious authentication patterns. A traffic record can reveal unusual volume or communication paths. None of those signals alone tells the whole story. If you can identify the likely scenario, gather evidence within your authority, and recommend a control that fits the risk, you are building real defensive security judgment. You've seen the attacks. Now watch how the first line of defense actually stops them. Next up in the job-ready IT roadmap is firewalls and network security. Where to place the firewall, when to segment VLANs, and how packet filtering drops the exact SYN floods you just learned to spot. Watch it because it turns today's attack knowledge into a working perimeter. Remember, careers aren't built by watching videos. They're built by applying what you learn. Pick one thing from today's lesson, build it, document it, and share it. That's how you get hired. Thanks for watching Hired in IT, where we're turning IT knowledge into career opportunities.